you. And
meeting.
we have a hand of welcome for Jonty, please.
That's very kind of you. One does a little bit feel, having read so eloquently, what's the expression actors use? They say, follow that. I thought I'd begin reading this evening by reading the 4 poems that Doug has recently put into stanzas 25, which I think is now, I hope now is available certainly in South Africa. The first of those poems is a lyrical ballad. It's really, I suppose, about my grandfather, and perhaps I need just a little bit of biographical explanation. I was born in 1939. When I was 18 months old, my father went away up north. He was chaplain to the South African regiment fighting in North Africa. Both my mother's brothers, my grandfather's 2 sons, were killed up north. And now, looking back on it, those years, I begin to understand a little bit about what must have been happening in my grandparents' hearts and minds, and about how I must have seemed to them then, how the significance I must have had to them. And of course, now that I'm a grandfather myself, I'm trying to in a sense, catch up on the past. So here's a lyrical ballad. The children gather round my chair and ask to see my book. One tells me she can read, one wants to play, and one climbs up to look. And suddenly comes back to me a glint of time long lost, a coin that rolled away below the floor to lie end on in dust. I'm standing at an old man's side who's lost both sons up north. He's reading to himself a book he says gives solace to his grief. I did not know the words he used, but sipped his lemon tea and peered intently at the book he read while leaning on his knee. I asked if he would say aloud the words I couldn't read. He spoke so softly in reply, I thought he said his prayers instead. I have his books and now can guess the choice he might have made. A song by Blake, or Kipling on his boy, or Cooper, lately mad. But then the words fell fast asleep and stayed that way for years. It's only now his voice has changed to mine. They wake to know his tears. A Dutch friend, a Dutch neighbor, showed me a poem by a Dutch poet called Ed Leerflang, written about a new bridge that had been built in Holland. And I tried to do, not a translation, it's a version. I'm told by my Dutch friends, it's a very inaccurate version. But it's a short lyrical poem, trying to playing with rhymes, really, I suppose, first of all. Below, the ebb and flow. Above, the wind-swept sky. And you and I. Below, so fast, so slow, the icy waters go. I know you know. Above, the light and cloud, our voices out aloud, both you and I. And then another short poem, a birthday, or a barday, I never pronounce it right, a morning song, a greeting to the morning. These songs are nothing like the truth. I make them up and guess their size. If people laugh, if people dance, there seems no point to say they're lies. I filled the glass, then drank it down. Improve the truth is what I said. There's little now that I regret, except I mourn the friends who are dead. I lie awake before the dawn to watch the morning light arrive. The birds are telling me the time. I bless the news, I'm still alive. And then the fourth of these poems, it's a sonnet. I find myself going back to the old forms, almost without meaning to. And sometimes I'll write a poem and then suddenly realize that actually what it is it's 14 lines and it rhymes and it's, oh, good heavens, it's a sonnet. When I was young, at the University of Cape Town, there was a gang of clever friends there, and we used to have competitions to see who could write a sonnet fastest of all. We would sit in the restaurant in the Union and have these competitions. I don't think they were particularly good poems, but one did learn the formal skills. And now that I'm old, I find it very useful to have those formal skills, in a sense, so much part of my imagination that I don't actually know that I have those skills. They're there. And when I need them, they appear. So this is a sonnet in the Shakespearean mold. And it's called Latterly. And so, at last, at least, we come to this. What should I call it now? A passing place until the engine stalls again. No fuss, I plead, as if I had my father's voice. The moment's bound to come when I shall dream and never wake again. I said I feared the grave as little as my bed. Did I seem to live as if I never really cared that I must die? I know there's really no return. I can't go creeping back to all the years that time somehow mislaid. The things you learn, you have to lose, I think. You keep the fears. And then one night or day, it must be said, you will not even know that you are dead. So those are the four poems that Doug was kind enough to include in stanzas. And may I say that I think stanzas is an extraordinary achievement, and I think number 25 is a particularly good number, and I think Doug deserves huge credit for his work. And there is, those of you who haven't seen it, there's an absolutely beautiful cover, a painting of a little Karoo town. And I shall return to the Karoo in some of the other poems that I'm going to read. One of the I'm now concentrating on this book, which was published by Hulanga, the Hulanga Press, last year, and it's the book is called Still Further: New Poems 2000 to 2020. It's not a sim volume. It's a substantial 130 pages and about 80 poems in it. It's quite a big work. Called Still Further because the last substantial collection I had in 2004 was called So Far. When I talked to my to our eldest son, who's now 54, and I talked to him about it, he said, "Well, Dad, I think the next book had better be called That's Far Enough." So the book that I'm now working on, I've got a few poems that may eventually go into it, will be called Far Enough, New Poems 2022, and then there are 4 question marks, obviously. One of the surprising things about the book, the editor, by the way, was again Doug Skinner, who has been a marvelous friend and support, and is a meticulous editor. Doug put the poems together and put them in the order. One of the things that surprised me when I began to try and look at the collection objectively was how very international it is. I mean, Jacques described me as a South African poet, and yes, I am, I suppose, in many ways a South African poet. But actually speaking, the poems, the settings of the poems vary enormously, from Hong Kong, China, India, quite a lot of African poems, a great many English poems, Italian poems, American poems. It was quite a surprise to find the extent to which this is, if you like, an international book. I thought I would read to you 4 poems that are collected in this book. The title is Seasonal Variations on a Double Theme. And it's spring, summer, autumn, winter. And the form is one that was invented, I think invented by a marvelous Australian poet called Chris Saunders. And the form is a kind of extended sonnet. It's 13 plus 8 lines, or, 21 lines, but divided 13/8, and not pentameters, but 11 syllabled lines. And for some reason, I found this a very attractive form, and these poems ended up using that particular form. The poems are dedicated to Chris Saunders and his partner, the marvelous novelist Michel de Kretser. The double theme. One of the themes is epistemological. In other words, how do you know what you know? What do you mean when you say, I know something? And the other is about living in a hamlet attached to a village. We live in a small cottage, and there was a chap came and lived 2 doors away from us who didn't fit that well into the neighborhood. If I tell you that one of the things he did was to keep a golden eagle in a cage in his garden, only just big enough for the golden eagle to stretch his wings. And quite a lot of us in the village were deeply unhappy about this. But this man, who I say was a big chap with a lot of tattoos all over him, didn't like the fact that his neighbors didn't find the way he lived and the way he kept animals particularly attractive. I mean, other things, he actually threatened. He threatened my wife, and since I'm not a small man myself, I got really rather upset about this chap. So, a double theme. How do you know you know when you say I know something? And the other theme is this rather difficult man who terrorized the neighborhood, including the postman. He's gone now, by the way, fortunately. He went apparently because a great many people decided he owed them money. So, spring. The sparrows in our hedgerow are arguing so fiercely they hardly notice a stranger who now comes sauntering into their airspace. It's possible, says the postman, that at last spring may be considering an arrival. He hoiks his bag on his back and refuses a second cup of coffee. The round beckons, he says with his usual never-hurried smile. Primroses signify tacit agreement, and the celandine seems inclined to assent. The sparrows resume their argumentation. They have entirely forgotten to beware the sparrow hawk's sudden entry from stage left. Of such things we are required to take account. This is a peaceful world of postmen calling, but ill tidings come bound in the same bundle, and the neighbor's angry posturing demands attention. He is disputing boundaries. Such a silence pervades throughout the garden when the sparrowhawk leaves, mission accomplished. But what I know is more than enough. Summer. High summer, heat haze. Too hot to consider anything but shade. Walk the far side of streets out of the sun's blaze. Salt of sweat burns the eyes. Bees have been banished. Grass is burnished. Brambles catch bare legs, make them bleed. The singular pink of Guelder roses orchestrates the margins of bridleway and footpath. Cow parsley thickens. Our neighbor's wife has found an old parasol and parades it in her garden wearing shorts. What the fuck are you staring at? Her husband shouts, waving his spade as if it were a weapon. Even the robin has retreated. He shelters in the shadows lurking behind the pump house. The relief of summer is in the thunder as clouds form their strange shapes on the horizon. Look, thunder says, growling at first, then in tones that brook no opposing. Think you've got it made? Not likely, even if I disperse myself. You better be aware of my existence. I'm the messenger, and my message is the storm. What you know, but it's never enough. Autumn. By small steps are big decisions made. The oaks are always the last to lose their leaves. I miss the vivid red and orange of the maples, but pastel shades of English brown and yellow soothe and soften. This is a gentle country, I'm inclined to think, as I stroll its paths. That still the bellicose neighbor berates me because, he says, I walked near his house last night. He'll do me in for trespass. Back off, my friend. This is bountiful autumn. Enough for you, enough for almost everyone. But he doesn't agree. The beech leaves have turned. The ash is turning too. But I'm inclined to stand my limited ground. Sometimes mere ineptitude provokes conflict. Polite words, gestures, demurral, forbearance, and exercising of practiced diplomacy. I am proffered good advice by those who know much more than I do. I wish to be peaceful to match the season. But how far, my judges, how far? When does compromise turn cowardly? What I know, I knew, I fear I'm forgetting. Winter. So, to winter, hurtling in on northeast winds, prizing paint off the weatherboarding. Try this for size, the raindrops proclaim as their muscles swell to icicles. Look, we can loosen even the cobbles. The leaves of the lilies crumple, the mortar in the brickwork crumbles, the cast iron rusts. It seems our neighbor has upped and off somewhere. The debt collector's van is almost blocking the lane. The postman says he will miss the excitement of smiling at a raging recipient, but bundles himself quickly back in his van. Our boundaries are safe from imprecations and incursions, but winter thinks otherwise. You weep? No, it's just an old man's rheumy eyes. It means nothing, this crying. I do not mourn my own decrepitude nor the death of friends. If I wept, it'd be at what's impossible, to have chosen to live my life differently, to believe what I don't credit. I repent of far too much, but I forgive too little. What I thought I knew, I fear I've forgotten. And I'm going to read another serious poem. Written before the present conflict in Ukraine, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But I think I had in mind some of the incidents that one read about in the wars in that part of Europe, in Czechoslovakia and Bosnia and earlier on. But the particular genesis of this poem, which is called The Short History of a War, was actually wandering in the Karoo and being shown a graveyard which was one of the graveyards of the Boer War. And the place itself looked like an oasis. And then one was shown these graves, and it made me think of what happens when peaceful places are invaded and destroyed. So this is a poem called "The Short History of a War." Like a great many of my poems, it is actually quite formal, in that they're quatrains. It's a rhyming poem. Though I hope the rhymes don't sound too. The rhymes don't sound too loudly. At first, it seemed a place. Sorry, I'll start again. At first, it seemed a place where one might dream of being at peace. A ring of sheltering hills, old gardens full of apple trees, a stream which sauntered down through dry stone walls, a poplar grove and flowering shrubs. We saw where barns and houses might be built, a field to fence for horses or for cows. The more we looked, the more like home it seemed. And then our guide, the farmer, said, "It's cursed, this place. Those whitewashed stones, they're graves, and more up there on top. And those were not the worst we found. We don't forget the war, not here. The children's bodies in a pit, the mothers found them there. Why kill the kids, the girls and babies too? Their throats were slit, and that's not what they did to lads." We picked our way up past the rocks and heard his story panted out in bursts. The war which tore the land in bits, no place to hide, no way to tell whom you should fear when neighbors might be worst of all. Too late to make amends. We'd rather shoot the lot and bury grief, and so put out the light, compound for good the ancestral debt. From higher up we see in shades of green where homesteads must have stood, and guess the shape of all the lives which flourished here. A plan that someone scrawled across, no hope. No building here, the farmer tells his guests. I know which side I'm on, but never say. I'll deal with snakes and graves, but not with ghosts. What else to do but look away? And who remembers now what was the cause? We've learned too well how wars are lost and won. Nor does it matter when this history was. It happened once, it will again. I said earlier that I would read some Karoo poems. For complicated reasons. I love the Karoo, even though I was not allowed to go there for a great chunk of the middle of my life. And a lot of my love of the Karoo is, in a sense, vicarious because of my deep friendship with a man called Meda Osler, who was vice president of the National Union of Students when I was president, then became president. Then we were at Oxford together. Then we taught at Sevenoaks together. He went back to South Africa and I wasn't allowed to, but we stayed the closest of friends for all our lives. And one of the blessings of late middle age and old age has been that we've actually been able to spend time together. Meda inherited 2 farms in the Karoo. One of them was called Hung Lip, not Hung Clip, which some South Africans like to think of. Hung Clip, hanging rock, hanging stone, but Hung Lip, the bottom lip hanging down in disappointment. But Meda, as well as farming Hung Lip, for a time farmed the farm next door that was called Viergelechen, which means in Afrikaans or Dutch, lying far away. So this is a poem called Viergelechen, and it's dedicated to Meda Osler. And again, rhymed, ABBA. A painter's eye might catch this light, retreating shades of purple, blue, and grey. The grass that wind has stripped and whipped away is brush-stroked, almost white. The ostrich pace the boundary fence. The mountains that we see so far away lie closer than our feeble senses say, their distance mere pretense. The call of cranes on close patrol comes rolling from the far-off plain, and downward stoop the falcons to maintain horizons in control. Korans crank upward into flight, then croak portentous warnings, storms of rain. The clapper larks go flapping up again, then whistle down from sight. Now in your fingers brews a spray of pungent, half-dead leaves. Scent stains the air and won't let go. Delight is always there. It dances night and day. Yet no one calls this place his own. The fragile spirits of the dead peer out from where they shelter on the level height to strike a sounding stone. Their past disclaims both time and place. Though knowledge gained by loss is hard to bear, you found just how it is to look despair, unflinching in the face. This jade clear light brings skies so near, the stars and planets gathered in a crowd. You'd think that if you were to call out loud, they'd hear your voice up there. Too late to pray? You smile and say we have to learn to cope with no more hope, not even hope of hope. It lies too far away. A poem that I dedicated to Gus Ferguson, When Gus was beginning in the early stages of the dementia that in the end took away one of the finest poets' minds that one could have hoped for. We were driving in the Karoo and we passed a sign to a village that's actually called Nitgenaamd, not named. And I thought that it had a particular resonance in relation to what Gus was going through at that stage of his life. So Nitgenaamd for Gus Ferguson. A signpost in the veld directs you off your route to Nitgenaamd, somewhere that's not without a name, but named without a name. And so you'd find yourself lost, perhaps, looking still. Was it that place we passed an hour or two ago? Perhaps we missed the sign. And is it far to go to get to Nitgenaamd? As friends forget our names, as words escape our brains. My home's in Nitgenaamd. I've lived there all my life. Another South African poem called Dry Vlei, translated as turnaround lake, turnaround vlei. Difficult to explain what a vlei is to people who've never seen one. So when we reached this spot, we knew we'd come too far. We turned our transport round again and gave the place its name. We could have called it something else, retreat perhaps, defeat, too far. There were no mountains, no ravines, a plain that stretched ahead for miles and miles and miles, no streams, no lakes, nor even sour bush, just open veld. The roads will not be made. Where blood and bullets once prevailed, our will to fight another war has died. We've learned to fear the traps, the branches on the road, the pits with poison spikes, the secret bombs which blow your legs away. You look behind and someone's closed the road. You turn again and now you see the barricades ahead, the cheerful soldiers in their armored cars. So don't delay to make this turnabout. And since we've learned to make the language mean the stuff we want, don't call it turning back. Retrieve the high advance. Let's call it that. The council of despair, the loser lost, the prize we looked for gone to someone else. Don't care too much, my friend. The future waits. The future waits. Let us pretend the future always wins. We again, driving through the Karoo, we passed near the I think it was actually on the Swartberg Pass. We passed a sign up saying "Droë waterval," dry waterfall, which seemed to me in some ways a marvelous metaphor for some of what was going wrong at the time. Was it ever thus, the waterfall where water never fell? Did we expect too much who hoped that all might share abundant gold? The baby-faced assassin in a suit giggles on his throne. The policemen wave aloft their whips. Burn the books, they tell too many lies. My ancient friends who manned the barricades must shrug their shoulders now. They fear that what we won is lost again. Who would have guessed that it might come to this? Ditis vat ditis. It is what it is. I would like to read two love poems. Well, yes, love poems, yeah. Kind of, I hope, fairly honest love poems. The first is called An Old Man and His Wife. He saw a butterfly half drowned and swam to rescue it. A palm then spilled it on the pool's surround, a pretty fragment saved from harm. He knew that sun dries butterflies, but later, walking where he lay, he found, with something like surprise, it had already flown away. And if you'd found a wasp half dead that swam in frantic circles there, would you have saved that too, she said. And yes, he would, despite his fear. You cannot have the one and not the rest. The hapless butterfly, the dangerous wasp. Like love, the lot comes undivided. Smile and sigh. And then an all-night lullaby. When one's been married for a long time, and one of you is lucky enough to be able to have long nights of sound sleep, and the other one is a bit of an insomniac. I think I know some other married couples who have the same problem. But anyway, this is called An All-Night Lullaby, addressed to the person I've been married to for a great many years now. Sleep sound, my dearest one, sleep sound. The noisy world goes whizzing round, and you are head down deep in sleep. And deep in sleep may you still stay, while light slides on to the edge of day. At dawn, the birds begin their song, the blackbird, thrush, and chaffinch too. Sing, how'd you do, you two, and still you sleep the whole night through, however loud or long that song. And so I drag myself awake to murmur gently, for your sake. And was that really all the night? All night, all right, so interrupted by the sun. And still you sleep, my dearest one. Anne is saying to me to read the grandchildren poem. I'll read that. I'm getting sort of beginning to feel that I've read enough. Sorry, let me just find it. This is called Song for the Grandchildren. A summer storm, the hail in bucket loads piled up against the verges of the roads, the wind shrieking like a song sung wrong. The clouds come down darker still beyond the hill, and children dancing in the rain, stripped bare, as unabashed as wildwood deer. A gawky girl is prancing there, who knows the world may watch but doesn't care. A boy who's keen on bees and bugs and slugs is taking stiff-legged steps to show how beetles go. And here's the youngest little one who merely wants to jump and run. And gone like that. Storm and childhood too. The hailstones into mud, the sky back blue, the garden flowers standing tall, and all the children bathed and in their beds, their fragrant heads filled full with how by chance a sudden rainstorm made them dance. I want to read you a poem called In the Water Margins. One of my collections was actually called In the Water Margins, and I wrote this poem in a sense because I realized that I'd never quite got around to explaining what the water margins are. It's a Chinese expression. When mandarins offended the emperor or the imperial court, he would send them far away from from Beijing, from the center of power. He would send them to the provinces, and the provinces were called in the water margins, partly because they tended to be undrained marshes. I suppose I was one of the very interesting things about going to live in Hong Kong and visiting China quite a bit was the realization that actually exile was not a new condition. Exile is a very old condition, and the rulers, whenever they get offended, don't necessarily execute their opponents. They just send them a long way away. And in a sense, that's what happened to me. I mean, when I got to England, the South African government refused to renew my passport, and I became stateless. And then, of course, the British gave me citizenship, and I had a very successful life. But in some senses, I felt I had been removed from the center of things, having involuntarily gone into exile. But this poem was written when I was back in South Africa, staying in the wilderness, staying in a cabin on stilts, overlooking reed beds. In the water margins. Here, at the water's edge, in a cabin on stilts, I'm listening to what the reeds are telling me in a kind of breathless whispering, as if, so indefinite that the words are like swallows flittering low, but too fast to be caught by anyone or anything except as streaks on the edge of one's retina, like smears of ink on a faded Chinese manuscript. And then in your most matter-of-fact voice, you say, it's just the noise of the wind in the reeds and the water moving when the reeds are shuffled backwards and forwards. So you scoff at me like a postmodernist philosopher. Do you really think you can hear what the reeds say? You may as well try to catch the swallows as they curve down to the meniscus of the water and then upwards. The water margins are where the troublemakers were sent by the emperor and his mandarins when they'd had enough of their insidious garrulity, inconstancy, duplicity. Even here at home, even in what was once my own country, the soul gets sent away out of all imagining. What the reeds are saying as the wind passes between them are aspirant conditionals, as if only, and provided. As if everything, that's what the reed bed is saying, which isn't much different from as if nothing, when nothing and victory may be synonymous. It's no good you telling me that it should be otherwise. If you can't hear what I hear when the reeds gossip to me, it's because you seem to know precisely that this is personal. You suppose the noise is sans significance, the words without meaning. Even when you think there is nothing that matters, something does. And that turns out to be the biggest puzzle, that there should be something at all and not just nothing. This is what I'm having such trouble with when I hear that persistent chorus. I feared those voices would be baleful. Instead, they are kind of peaceful, kind of accepting, maybe even kind of kindly here in the water margins. And last, and I'll stop, it's a lyric that concludes the second last poem in this book, which is a letter to Maida Oza on my 70th birthday. And I won't read the whole poem, but I will read the lyric at the end of it. The shadows spiral on the wall of this small study where I write. Refractions of the sunlight fall as planes of color tinged with white. The wind makes music in the pines and wisps of green are taking flight, rallentando as evening spins its whirlpool way to deeper night. The darkness now seems darker still and eddies down the edge of sight, goes twisting down and down until it seems so deep it's almost light. Thank you for listening.
Please have a hand of applause for Jonty. I'm going to hand over to Melissa to handle questions if there are any questions. But I just want to say, Jonty, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be in a room together like this, and to hear you read like this. It felt significant and sort of and comforting and kindly somehow in the ways that you mentioned. Thank you. It was just lovely. Before I really start gushing, I'm going to hand over to Melissa and let's see if we have any questions in the room.
Yeah, so anybody want to ask anything or say anything, you're welcome to pop a hand up or type it in the chat or start us off. Douglas.
I was struck by the difference between the landscapes of the garden in England and the landscapes of the Karoo, how different they are, and how different the metaphysic of the writer, of the person, of the being inside that landscape is. And perhaps Jonty can say just something about that, the presence of the person in such different landscapes.
And yeah, well, that's a very interesting thought. But no, I don't. It's something I'll have to think about, Doug. What struck me most about reading this evening was the extent to which the music of the poems, the musicality of the poems. I enjoy listening to the music that I once wrote. No, you may well be right about that. I mean, there may well be a personal response to the landscape that I need. Maybe I need to think about, which may actually help with some more poems in due course.
And then we've got a hand from Jacques or Barbara.
Jonty, so you've actually started answering the question that I wanted to ask, but maybe you could answer it some more. I can only speak for myself, but I found something consoling about the poems that you read tonight. And in some ways that's odd, because there's something I think it has to do with the musicality that you mentioned. So if I think about some of the phrases that I remember, the baby-faced assassin in a suit, to look despair unflinching in the face. Those are hard-hitting lines. They're hard-hitting phrases, and yet there's something consoling. Would you agree that that has something to do with the musicality, with form, in fact, and with rhyme? And do you go to rhyming poets who use form when you are sad? And which ones? Who are some of the poets that you love reading when you're in a heightened state of emotion? Wordsworth I know about, but who are some of the others?
Word of the modern. I mean, I do care about form, and I tend to find some of the formlessness of the moderns off-putting. So it's the people I read, the moderns I read, are people like John Fuller and James Fenton. Robert Frost had a huge influence, and perhaps even more so Edward Thomas. And that, of course, takes you back to Thomas Hardy. It's that's the tradition that I care about most. My postgraduate work was mainly on the Victorian poets, and once upon a time I knew quite a bit about Wordsworth and Tennyson, and learnt an enormous amount from them. And then then further back, of course, there was as you mentioned, the huge influence of Marjorie McCarran on me via the metaphysical poets. But yes, I prefer the formal. I mean, some of the stuff I read was less formal, but even when I'm, in a sense, flirting with the informal, the structures matter to me. And the structures matter to me partly because what drives them forward is the music. It's the sound, the assonance, and occasionally the dissonance and the consonance. That I care about. One of the things that I notice about a lot of what I read, I mean, I do read quite a bit of what is published at the moment. When I go to a poetry reading, if I have a text, I listen very carefully to where the reader pauses, because often there is a distinct difference between the pauses of the readers, the reader, even reading his or her own poems, and what is on the page. So you will find a line that will end with the word "the," all right? And yet the reader will put "the" that was at the end of his line, and the printed version will actually be attached to the noun at the beginning of the next line. In other words, that writer hasn't thought hard enough about the crucial difference between poetry and prose, which is the division of poetry into lines. I mean, poems are divided into lines. That's the difference between poetry and prose, the crucial difference between poetry and prose. And yet a lot of poets simply don't think hard enough about why poetry is divided into lines. I'm in the days when I used to teach creative writing, it was one of the things that I kept on and on and on about. Why are poems divided into lines, and what is the point of having them divided into lines? I can become very boring on this subject, so I'll stop now.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments? Not seeing any hands. Anyone's welcome to unmute themselves if they do want to hop on before we end off this section of the evening.
I suspect most people have retreated to the Seven Sleepers Den.
Seems that way. There's Barbara. Yes.
Okay.
Hello, Jonty. I wasn't going to ask a question, but since you made that statement about the line ending, for instance, with "the," I have started writing poems down the center of a page, and that for me makes sense, to have both sides of a poem breathing. I can understand in prose that you keep going to the margin because you're making a dense page of words and breaking up with paragraphs. But what would you say about or against keeping a poem on the left side of a margin? It's just a question. Thank you.
You get shape poems, which some hilariously clever shape poems, which are are great fun to do. It's the question of the reading aloud that interests me, and what I'd be interested to do is to hear you reading those poems, because for me, absolutely crucial in the whole process of writing poems is early on, there'll be the thought process and so on. But then when the poem is beginning to take what may become a final shape, I say them out, I say them to myself, I say them out loud again and again to try and get the cadences right, try and get the sounds right. I've noticed recently that there have been some published poems where the concentration is on the right side of the page, and doing it down the middle would be very, very interesting. But I would like to hear the poem read before I've made a judgment about it.
I think what I use, the shape of the poem, is part of not using punctuation, but where you would pause, where you would accentuate something, there would be another line, which would be one thought. And or if it would lead on to the next one, there might be a very long line. Anyway.
I mean, there have been some of the American poets have tried not using any punctuation at all, and I think it's something that is worth doing. I'm just trying to remember who it is. I think it was Wordsworth, because Wordsworth composed most of his poems out loud when he was out walking. He'd come back in and dictate them to Dorothy, his sister, and she would actually add the punctuation. He would. It wasn't Wordsworth's punctuation. It was Dorothy's additional.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else who'd like to add anything to the conversation? Looks like that's it for the evening.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
It's been very interesting.
Thank you for sharing your time and your work and your knowledge with us. It's been lovely listening.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.